My wife wants me to get her best friend pregnant, so I said yes. As I sat there swirling the remnants of my whiskey in the glass, I was struck by the absurdity of the moment again. How did we end up here? My wife and her best friend had dropped a bombshell that felt both surreal and unexpected. My wife, Grace, and I have been married for 7 years now. Our marriage is based on the same vows and love as any traditional union, but it's always been a little unconventional. We were drawn to each other because we share a sense of adventure, openness, and commitment to. We wanted to build a life that didn't necessarily fit the mold. From the very beginning, Laura, Grace's best friend, played a key role in our relationship. She wasn't just a passing figure. She became a fixture over the years. Her role in the family evolved from being Grace's confidant to becoming a cornerstone of our family dynamic. When our first child was born, Laura was there, pacing the hospital waiting room with a bag of snacks for Grace. From the moment she held our baby girl, it was clear she'd play an important role in our children's lives. She had an endless nervous energy, which made it obvious she'd be a big part of our family. She's been like a second mom since day one, always showing up with thoughtful gifts and endless patience. She's gifted, patient, and has a knack for calming tantrums in a way that even amazed us. She's been there for all of our kids' birthdays, holidays, and school milestones. She knows all our kids' favorite bedtime stories, has a special recipe for pancakes that they love, and is their go-to partner for hide-and-seek marathons. Even on the busiest days, when Grace and I are stretched thin between work and parenting, Laura steps up and does what needs to be done. She's an impressive woman. She's built a successful career in marketing with a reputation for creative campaigns that leave competitors in awe. She's independent and driven. She's also very ambitious and has built a great life for herself. Despite her success, she's never been interested in settling down romantically. She saw relationships as a complication she didn't need until recently. It was supposed to be a regular night, a nice way to end the day. The kids had gone to bed, leaving behind their usual collection of stuffed animals and unfinished projects. Laura, my wife Grace's best friend, was sitting comfortably on the couch as she had been countless times before. She'd become a regular in our lives, someone we could count on and rely on, and she was deeply involved in our lives. I was starting to think I had things all wrong about how this house worked. The air was warm with laughter and the subtle haze of wine-induced relaxation. Laura was in the middle of a story about a colleague who had messed up a pie chart when Grace dropped her bombshell. "What if my husband was your donor?" Grace asked, her voice calm and measured. She was making a suggestion about what to order for dinner. I was so taken aback that I actually choked on the whiskey, burning as it went down. Laura's laugh faltered, turning into a nervous giggle that trailed off. "Grace, that was a bit awkward," I managed to say after a coughing fit. My voice was a little hoarse, a mix of shock and disbelief. Grace looked at me with a mix of amusement and seriousness. She gave a sly smile. She asked the question as if I were the one being ridiculous. "You've seen what amazing kids you can make. It makes sense." I looked at Laura, thinking she'd laugh and say it was just one of Grace's eccentric jokes. But Laura didn't react that way. She shifted in her seat a bit, her hands gripping the hem of her sweater, her face a mixture of discomfort and something else I couldn't quite place. Was it some kind of agreement? I mean, Laura started off by saying, and she spoke a bit hesitantly, her voice soft. We've already discussed this. Time seemed to stand still. Her words lingered in the air, carrying a sense of gravity and unease. I leaned forward, my heart racing. What do you mean? Grace said, as though this were a common topic of conversation. Laura's been thinking about starting a family, Grace continued, but the idea of going through a sperm bank? She wasn't comfortable with the idea of using a sperm bank. Then it dawned on me why her father was an anonymous donor when she could have someone she trusts, someone who's already shown he can be a great dad. Laura looked at Grace, then at me. Her cheeks turned a little red. It just makes sense, she said quietly. I know you. I trust you. And it just didn't seem right. I felt like I was dealing with someone I didn't know. I turned to Grace, hoping she could shed some light on the situation, but her next words only made things more confusing. Grace said calmly, "There's no need for a donor at all. You could just have sex with her and get her pregnant. Why go to a doctor when you can make the process completely natural?" I was taken aback. I was surprised by her suggestion. Have sex with her best friend? This was getting out of control. I looked at Grace, waiting for her to laugh and show that this was all a joke. But she was calm and businesslike, like Laura. On the other hand, she looked like she wanted to crawl into a hole. She kept her eyes fixed on her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap, her fingers twisting nervously. She kept a faint smile on her lips, showing that she was torn up inside. This is crazy. You're actually suggesting I cheat on my wife? Grace replied in a calm tone. This isn't about infidelity. It's about practicality. The end goal is to have a child. This is the easiest and most natural way to achieve it. I blinked, trying to find the right words to describe how bold her logic was. I was trying to process what she was saying as my thoughts raced. Was this some kind of test? Was Grace being serious? Or was she testing me? Laura rejected this absurd suggestion outright. Why was she smiling? This is a bit out there. I spoke up again, hoping to get their attention and help them see what I saw. Have you two really thought this through? Do you realize how complicated this would make things? Let's not worry about the logistics for now. What about the emotional impact? Grace gave a shrug, her expression unchanging. We've given it some thought. Laura needs your help, and you're in a position to give it to her. Why make things more complicated than they need to be? Plus, you wouldn't be doing it behind my back. I'm the one who's suggesting it. I looked at Laura. Her voice softened as she asked, "You're okay with this, with me?" Laura's blush deepened for a moment, and I thought she wouldn't answer. But then she nodded, barely, which confirmed what I'd feared. "I'm at a loss as to what else I can do," she said quietly. "I'd like to have a baby. And if Grace is okay with this," her voice trailed off, leaving the unspoken words. I was flooded with a rush of emotions. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to make sense of the rush of emotions. I was shocked, disbelieving, guilty, and had a faint, unwelcome flicker of curiosity. I'm not even sure where to begin. I mumbled, shaking my head. This isn't something you can decide on the spot. I'm not sure what to do. Grace leaned forward and looked me in the eye. Her gaze was a strange mix of determination and reassurance. "It's not straightforward, but it's achievable," she said. "If you think about it, it's a solution that works for everyone." I thought to myself, not me. I don't think this is the solution we're looking for. It's a recipe for disaster. As I looked between Grace's calm, confident face and Lisa's vulnerable, pleading one, I realized this wasn't just about logic. It was about the complicated web of relationships and desires that were now putting us all in a difficult position. The next morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and trying to make sense of things when they walked in. Grace was in a relaxed mood, as if she were about to make a casual comment about the weather. Laura followed behind her, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes kept moving between me and Grace. "Good morning," Grace said, grabbing a mug from the counter. She poured herself some coffee and replied, not trusting herself to speak more than a word or two. She took a sip of her coffee and sat across from me, looking relaxed. "I've been thinking," she began in a relaxed, conversational tone, as though we were discussing plans for a weekend getaway. "Maybe we've reached the end of our relationship." Things got even more complicated when she suggested we all take part in a threesome together. I blinked, sure I'd misheard her. What did she mean by "we all did what together"? I asked her carefully, even though I already had a feeling I knew what she meant. Grace smiled, her eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. "You know, a threesome would be the perfect solution. Wouldn't it be great if we could all just be ourselves? Nobody would feel left out, and we could just be honest about what we want. And it might even be fun." I was so surprised, I didn't know what to say. I looked at her, trying to figure out if she was joking, but she looked serious. "Grace," I said slowly, setting my coffee cup down, I said, "You're not serious, are you? A threesome with my wife and her best friend? This isn't just some wild fantasy. This is the real world." "Precisely," she said, leaning forward. "Sometimes you have to think outside the box in real life. Laura is hoping to start a family. You could give her one, but why not make the experience fun?" It was a great experience for all of us. There was no awkwardness, no secrets, and no drama. It was just honesty and practicality. I was taken aback when I heard this suggestion. It's not about what I'm willing to do. It's about what makes sense and what's right for the situation. This isn't what I had in mind. "Grace, you're acting like I'm being unreasonable. I see your point. It's a bit unconventional, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. We're all adults here, so we can handle this together. Grace, this isn't something you can just handle on your own. It can really ruin relationships and lives." As I spoke, I could see determination in her eyes and a kind of hesitant curiosity in Laura's. They were both serious. It suddenly hit me just how deep we'd gotten into this. Later that day, I found out the truth. I went to meet my closest friend, Daniel. He'd been my sounding board for years. I could always count on him to give me the lowdown, even when it was tough to hear. If anyone could help me get my head around this, it was him. We met at our usual spot, a quiet bar tucked away in the corner of town. When I got there, Daniel was already there, drinking a beer and looking at his phone. He looked up as I sat down in the booth across from him. "You looked like you were going through something, and it was clear that something was wrong." He put his phone down and said, "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. Grace's suggestion, Laura's reaction, and how out of my depth I felt as I spoke. Daniel's expression changed from amusement to disbelief to concern. When I was done, he leaned back in his seat and rubbed a hand over his face. He finally said, "Wow, that's a lot. Grace has always been a little unconventional, but this is a whole new level." I mumbled, running a hand through my hair. "So, what's the best way to handle this? How do I even begin to handle this?" Daniel took a long sip of his beer, then put the glass down with a decisive thud. "First of all, you need to make it clear to Grace that this isn't going to happen, no matter how she tries to make it look. This whole situation is a disaster waiting to happen. You've got to set some boundaries, man." I tried negotiating, but she just keeps coming back with these arguments like she's trying to rationalize the whole thing. "Laura, she's not really putting up a fight either." Daniel frowned. "I understand, but here's the thing. This isn't just about them, either. It's about you too, actually. You have every right to say no. Don't let them make you feel guilty about something you're not comfortable with." I gave a little nod. His words were sinking in. But what if I was overreacting? Grace keeps saying it's not a big deal and that we can handle it. What if she's right? Daniel shook his head. "She's not right about this. Look, I'm not saying I know your relationship better than you do, but this isn't healthy. It's one thing to talk about options, but what Grace is suggesting is a whole other level. It's not just unconventional. It's a bit reckless, don't you think?" He leaned forward, his expression serious. "You really need to have a proper conversation with her, not about the threesome, the baby, or anything like that. You need to talk about your marriage. If she's willing to risk everything for something like this, there's probably a bigger issue at play." I looked at the table. His words had a bigger impact than I expected. He was right, as it turned out. This wasn't just about Grace's suggestion. It was about the cracks in my marriage that I hadn't even noticed. I realized we're at a point where we have to decide whether to back down or not. I asked quietly, "What if she keeps pushing for this?" Daniel looked at me straight in the eye. "Then you need to ask yourself if this is the kind of relationship you want to be in. A marriage is meant to be a partnership, not a one-sided negotiation. If Grace isn't willing to respect your boundaries, maybe it's time to rethink what you're fighting for." His words weighed on me like a heavy blanket. It wasn't the answer I wanted to hear, but deep down I knew he was right. I needed to take a stand, not just for myself but for the future of my marriage too. We spent the rest of the evening talking. Daniel gave me advice and support as I tried to get my head around everything. By the time I left, I felt a little more on solid ground and ready to tackle whatever came next. As I drove home, I kept thinking about how I needed to have that conversation with Grace, even though I knew it might be tough. If we couldn't come to an understanding, Daniel was right. Our marriage might already be beyond repair. After pacing the house for what felt like hours, I finally mustered up the courage to confront Grace. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book, as if nothing had happened. But my stomach was in knots as I sat down across from her, my heart beating fast in my chest. "Grace," I began, my voice steady but firm, "we need to talk about this whole situation." She put her book down and looked at me, her expression calm. After what felt like an eternity, I finally mustered up the courage to confront Grace. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book, and seemed perfectly fine. But I was nervous as I sat down across from her, my heart racing. Grace, we really need to talk about this whole situation. I was curious, though, so I figured you'd want to know. What are your thoughts on this? I took a deep breath and got my thoughts together. First of all, I need to make something absolutely clear. I love you, and I'm committed to this marriage. But I'm not comfortable with what you've been suggesting, this thing with Laura. She didn't interject, so I carried on. If Laura really wants a baby, and you think it's important that I help, then the only thing I'm willing to do is be a donor. That's all I have to say on the matter. I'm not comfortable with the idea of doing it naturally, so I won't go through with it. It's not just about setting boundaries. It's about showing respect for you, for Laura, and for myself. Grace's expression was a bit unreadable for a moment. I thought she was going to disagree, but instead she nodded slowly. Okay, she said quietly. If that's what you want, then that's what we'll do. I won't push you on it anymore. I felt a bit relieved, but that quickly turned into some lingering frustration. Why did you even bring it up in the first place? I asked him. Do you realize how out of the ordinary that sounded? You're my wife, and you were talking about me sleeping with your best friend like it was no big deal. She looked away, her cheeks flushing slightly. I don't know, she admitted. I suppose I just wanted to try something different and mix things up a bit. I know it sounds a bit out there, but I thought it could be fun. It's something new for us. Grace repeated, sounding surprised. That's not new. That's crossing a line, a big one. I apologized and said, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to hurt you or mess up what we have. I just got caught up in this idea of, I guess I just got carried away a bit. I wasn't trying to be more adventurous, but I see now that I went too far. I'm really sorry about that. Her sincerity helped calm some of my anger, but I wasn't quite ready to let it go completely. I think it's important for you to understand, Grace. This isn't something you can just bring up and expect me to be okay with. There are consequences to suggestions like that. It made me think about everything in our relationship and marriage. She took my hand in hers. Her grip was firm but gentle. She said, I understand, and I don't want you to feel that way. I'll put it to rest. Let's not talk about Laura or anything like that. You're right. It was out of line. At last, I realized I'd crossed a line. Thanks. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. You're right, that's enough. I'm sorry if I gave you the impression that it wasn't over. Over the next few days, the tension that had been hanging over the house like a storm cloud began to dissipate. Grace stuck to her word and let it go, and we started working on rebuilding the trust and connection between us. She was more open about her feelings and told me that she'd felt restless. Lately, it wasn't because she was unhappy with me, but because she was searching for something to make her life feel more meaningful. I really listened, and we talked about how we could grow together as a couple without going into dangerous territory. It felt like we were reconnecting in a way we hadn't in years. We talked with Laura about why we fell in love in the first place and rediscovered the reasons. I was ready for some awkwardness, but I was happy to see that Laura was understanding. She said her cheeks felt a little embarrassed. She thought this idea was a bit out there and that I shouldn't have gone along with it. Laura said she'd just gotten caught up in Grace's enthusiasm. The truth is, I respect your limits. If you're willing to be a donor, that's more than enough for me. We decided to go ahead with a plan to visit a fertility clinic where I could donate, and we made sure everything would proceed medically and professionally. Laura was really grateful, and things between us got a lot better. There was no awkwardness left over. We just knew we were all trying to get through a tricky situation with care and respect. With that behind us, Grace and I focused on building our relationship. We started going on regular dates again. We started going out again on weeknights, which we hadn't done in a long time. We spent more time chatting, laughing, and thinking about what the future might hold. Grace even suggested a weekend getaway to rekindle the spark between us, and it was exactly what we needed. Laura also seemed to be in a better mood. She followed through with the donor process and, a few months later, shared the great news that she was expecting. It was great to see her so happy. It made me feel like we'd all come out of this stronger. One evening, I sat with Grace in our backyard, watching the sunset. I was grateful for how we'd managed to get through the tough times. Instead of tearing us apart, it had brought us closer together. Grace turned to me and gave me a smile. She said, "You know, I'm glad we went through all of this. It made me think about how strong we are and how much we mean to each other. I'll never take that for granted." I concurred. We'll tackle whatever comes our way together. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was genuine. It was based on love, trust, and a commitment to grow together. I knew we were ready for whatever the future held. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. How would you have handled this situation? Don't forget to subscribe to get more amazing stories that you'll want to read again and again. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.